In the winter of 1607, roughly 100 men stepped off 3 small ships onto a swampy peninsula in Virginia. They named it Jamestown. Within 2 years, almost all of them were dead. Out of the first wave of Jamestown settlers, historians can confirm only 2 men whose surnames survived, who have known descendants alive in America today. 2 names out of 100 men after the worst winter in early American history. That's the real story behind the oldest surname in America. It's not really about who came first, it's about who survived. Today I'm going to show you the 20 oldest surnames in America, names carried across the Atlantic, on the Mayflower, and into the swamps of Jamestown. Some of these names are everywhere today, some barely made it, and one of them might be the only name from the very first colony that's still walking around in 2026. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you might be looking at your own last name completely differently. Here's something that surprises a lot of people. Almost none of the oldest American surnames were actually created in America. Unlike countries with 1,000 years of their own surname history, where a name like Smith or Schmidt was born locally from a real blacksmith standing at a real forge. In that exact country, American surnames mostly came pre-made. They crossed the ocean already formed. English, Scottish, Welsh. A name like Smith already had 600 years of history in England before a single Smith ever set foot on American soil. So the question, what's the oldest surname in America, isn't really about invention, it's about survival. Which names made it onto a ship? Which families survived the first brutal winters? Which lines didn't die out, didn't get diluted by 400 years of population growth, and are still recognizable today? And the data on this is more precise than you'd expect. Researchers have actually traced specific surnames from the 1620 Mayflower passenger list all the way through the first U.S. Census in 1790, and some all the way to today. That's the story we're telling. 20 surnames, 400 years, some thrived, some nearly vanished. Let's go. Number 20, Alden, the man who became a legend simply by being young. We start with a name tied to one of the most famous love stories in early American history. John Alden arrived on the Mayflower as a young cooper, a barrel maker, hired to maintain the ship's water and supply casks. He wasn't a separatist pilgrim seeking religious freedom, he was simply hired crew, and yet he ended up staying, becoming one of the most prominent and respected colonists in Plymouth. The surname Alden derives from the Old English personal name Ealdwine, meaning old friend, combining Eald old and wine friend. The name is documented as a personal name as early as the Domesday Book of 1086, and as a surname from the 12th and 13th centuries onward in English records, partly because John Alden's courtship of Priscilla Mullins became the subject of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's famous 19th century poem, The Courtship of Miles Standish, a name meaning old friend, immortalized by poetry 2 centuries later. Number 19, Standish, the soldier who never quite fit in. Miles Standish wasn't a pilgrim either. He was a professional soldier, a mercenary really, hired by the Plymouth colony specifically because they expected trouble, whether from conflict with native peoples or rival colonial powers. The surname Standish is an English habitation name taken from a place in Lancashire, England, meaning roughly stony pastureland. Standish himself never formally joined the Pilgrim's Church, which made him something of an outsider, even while leading their military defense. Documented as a Mayflower passenger in 1620, the Standish name carries one of the more interesting contradictions in early colonial history. The most important military man in the colony was, religiously speaking, never quite one of them. Number 18, Brewster, the elder who held the colony together. If Standish was the colony's sword, William Brewster was its soul. Brewster served as the ruling elder of the Plymouth Church until his death in 1644, effectively the senior religious authority in the entire colony, second in moral influence perhaps only to the governor himself. The surname Brewster is an English occupational name, originally denoting a brewer of ale. In medieval England, brewing was frequently a trade carried out by women, and Brewster was originally the feminine form of brewer. Documented from the Mayflower passenger list of 1620, the name shows how occupational surnames could survive completely disconnected from their literal meaning. By the time William Brewster stepped onto the Mayflower, his family had not brewed ale for generations. The name had become pure identity, no longer occupation. Number 17, Allerton, second in command and the start of a vast family tree. Isaac Allerton held a position of real authority in early Plymouth, second only to Governor William Bradford in the colony's formative years. The surname Allerton is an English habitation name taken from any of several English places of that name, themselves likely derived from Old English elements relating to alder trees and a settlement or farmstead. Documented as part of the 1620 Mayflower passenger list, the Allerton name's significance lies less in fame and more in administrative power, a reminder that the earliest American surnames weren't only carried by religious leaders or soldiers, but also by the bureaucrats and administrators who actually kept a fragile colony functioning. Number 16, Soul. The servant who signed his own future. Not every Mayflower passenger was a leader. George Soul arrived as a servant to Edward Winslow, one of the colony's prominent men, bound essentially to work for his passage and survival. And yet, Soul's name is permanently written into American founding history for one specific reason. He was a signer of the Mayflower Compact, the document considered one of the foundational texts of American self-governance. The surname Soul likely derives from an Old French or Middle English term, possibly related to soul in a religious or personal name context, or from a place name. Documented in Plymouth records from the 1620s, the Soul line demonstrates something important. Legal and historical permanence in America was never only reserved for the wealthy or powerful. A servant's signature carries the same weight in the historical record as a governor's. Number 15, Nelson. A name with land and a quiet 2 centuries of stability. William Nelson came to Plymouth before 1636, and by August 1640 he had land formally granted to him, a critical marker in colonial records because land grants were carefully documented and have survived in archives to this day. The surname Nelson is a patronymic, meaning son of Neil or son of Nigel, Neil being a name of Gaelic origin meaning champion or cloud, depending on the specific etymological tradition consulted by historians. Documented from the 1630s onward, Nelson represents a different kind of survival story than Alden or Standish. Not the dramatic, romanticized colonial myth, but the quiet, steady accumulation of land and stability that allowed a family name to simply persist, generation after generation, without ever making headlines. Number 14, Sherman, wealth, inheritance, and a name's quiet power. William Sherman lived in Plymouth from 1630 to 1634, and according to colonial records, he did well enough in that short window to leave his children a substantial inheritance of land. The surname Sherman is an English occupational name derived from shearman, someone who sheared wool from sheep or cropped the nap from woven cloth, an essential trade in England's massive medieval wool economy. Documented in Plymouth colony records of the early 1630s, the Sherman name is a clean example of how economic success, even within a single generation, could anchor a surname's survival for centuries. Wealth, even modest colonial wealth, bought a name, permanence. Number 13, Carver. The first governor and the shortest reign. John Carver became the very first governor of Plymouth Colony, the man who held the colony's highest office during its most desperate, deadliest year. He didn't survive long in the role. Carver died in the spring of 1621, just months after taking office, during the brutal first winter that killed roughly half the colony. The surname Carver is an English occupational name denoting someone who carved wood or stone, a skilled craftsman's trade. Documented as part of the Mayflower passenger list in 1620, the Carver name carries an almost poetic weight. The man who shaped the colony's earliest governance shared his name with those who shaped wood and stone. 2 different kinds of carving, one name. Number 12, Bradford, the governor who wrote the story down himself. When John Carver died, William Bradford became governor, and he held that position for most of the next 3 decades, making him arguably the single most influential figure in Plymouth's early survival. What makes Bradford's name particularly significant isn't just his governance, it's that he wrote it all down. His journal, later published as Of Plymouth Plantation, remains the single most important surviving primary source for understanding daily life among the Pilgrims. The surname Bradford is an English habitation name derived from Broad Ford, a wide, shallow river crossing point after which numerous English towns were named. Documented from the Mayflower passenger list of 1620, the Bradford name connects directly to modern history too. The founder of Eastman Kodak, George Eastman, was a documented descendant of William Bradford, a 19th century photography pioneer descending from the man who wrote America's founding diary by hand. Number 11. White, born in the middle of the ocean. Some surnames survive through ordinary persistence. The White name survived through something stranger, literal birth at sea. William White and his wife Susanna sailed on the Mayflower with their son Resolved. During the voyage itself, somewhere on the Atlantic, between England and a continent they had not yet seen, Susanna gave birth to a second son. They named him Peregrine, meaning traveler or pilgrim, because that's exactly what he was, even before he was born on land. The surname White is an English descriptive nickname referring to pale hair, complexion, or skin, one of the most straightforward types of surnames in the entire English naming system. Documented genealogically from 1620, White ranked 11th in the United States Census of 1790. Nearly 170 years later, one of only 7 Mayflower surnames that remain common enough nationally to appear on both lists. A name born in the middle of an ocean and still among the most common in the country 2 centuries later. Number 10, Thompson, lost to history except for the name. Not every name on this list has a dramatic personal story attached, and that itself tells you something important. Edward Thompson is documented as a Mayflower passenger in 1620. Beyond that basic fact, detailed records of his life in Plymouth are sparse compared to figures like Bradford or Standish. He didn't become governor, he didn't write a famous journal, he simply made the crossing. The surname Thompson is an English and Scottish patronymic meaning son of Thomas, Thomas being one of the most common given names in medieval England, derived ultimately from the Aramaic name of the apostle. Documented in 1620 and confirmed again in the 1790 U.S. Census, where it ranked 13th nationally, Thompson is proof that surname survival in America was never purely about fame. Sometimes a name simply persists because enough ordinary people carried it forward generation after generation without anyone writing their biography. Number 9, Martin, a merchant's name and a family that nearly ended in one winter. Christopher Martin and his wife Mary, whose maiden name was Prower, were among the Mayflower's passengers in 1620 and among the colony's merchant class members, responsible for managing supplies and trade relationships critical to the colony's survival. The Martin family, like so many others that first winter, faced devastating losses, yet the surname persisted. The surname Martin is ultimately derived from the Latin name Martinus, related to Mars, the Roman god of war, one of the most widespread surnames across the entire European continent, carried into America through English, French, and Spanish colonial lines simultaneously. Documented from 1620, Martin ranked 20th in the 1790 census, one of the 7 confirmed Mayflower to census survivors, and a name whose European ubiquity gave it multiple independent paths into American population growth. Number 8, Moore, 4 siblings, and a name with 2 spellings. Richard Moore crossed on the Mayflower as a child, along with his siblings Ellen, Jasper, and Mary Moore, among the youngest passengers on the entire voyage. The surname, spelled Moore by the original family, but commonly rendered Moore in later generations, is an English topographic name referring to someone who lived near a moor, open, uncultivated wasteland or marsh, a common feature of the English landscape. Documented from the Mayflower list of 1620, Moore ranked 10th in the 1790 census, confirmed as one of the 7 surviving Mayflower to census surnames. The spelling shift from Moore to Moore over generations is itself a small case study in how American surnames drifted slightly from their original European spelling, not through any single decision, but through accumulated clerical variation across hundreds of years of handwritten records. Number 7. Williams. Son of William and one of the largest surname families in American history. Thomas Williams sailed on the Mayflower in 1620 carrying a surname that would go on to become one of the most dominant family names in the entire history of the United States. Williams is a patronymic surname, meaning quite literally son of William, William itself being a Norman name brought to England after 1066, meaning resolute protector or Wilhelmate from Germanic roots. Documented in 1620, Williams ranked 7th in the 1790 census, confirmed as one of the 7 Mayflower to census survivors. But the story doesn't end there. By the modern era, Williams remains consistently in the top 5 surnames in the entire United States, one of the most stable, enduring surnames across the full 400-year span of American history. Number 6. Clark. The clerk who couldn't write his name the same way twice. Richard Clark sailed on the Mayflower in 1620, carrying a surname with a deep and slightly ironic history. The surname Clark, or Clark, derives from the Latin clericus, meaning a clergyman or a clerk, someone trained in reading and writing in an era when literacy itself was a specialized, valuable skill. In medieval England, the ability to read and write was concentrated heavily within the church, which is precisely why clerk and clergyman share linguistic roots. Documented from 1620, the name appears with 2 spellings, Clark without the final E and Clark with it, even in early records, a reminder that surname spelling in this era was never fully standardized, even for a family literally named after the literate profession. Confirmed as one of the 7 Mayflower to census survivors, Clark ranked 6th in the 1790 United States Census, a position the name has maintained with remarkable consistency into the modern era. Number 5. Beheathland, the forgotten name that might be the oldest of all. Now we go back further than the Mayflower entirely, back to Jamestown, 1607, 13 years before the Pilgrims even set sail. Robert Beheathland, sometimes recorded as Behethlin or Betheland, was identified in early Jamestown records simply as a gentleman, a specific social rank denoting someone of genteel birth but not titled nobility. Here's what makes this name extraordinary. Historians researching the original Jamestown settlers have identified only 2 men from that very first 1607 landing party who are confirmed to have living descendants in the United States today. Robert Beheathland is one of them. The surname itself is an English habitation name, almost certainly derived from a place name, though its exact origin point in England remains genuinely uncertain in the historical record, a rare case on this list where we have to be honest that the etymology is not fully settled. What we do know is this. Descendant family names traced back to Beheathland include Bernard, Crew, Withers, Who, Massey, Lane, Griffith, and Berryman, meaning the Beheathland bloodline survived, even as the original surname itself effectively vanished. Absorbed into the female lines and surnames of later generations, this may be the single oldest documented surviving American lineage, and almost nobody has ever heard the name. Number 4. Rolfe. The man whose marriage changed 2 histories at once. John Rolfe arrived in Jamestown in June 1610 aboard the 3rd supply ship sent to the struggling colony. He became wealthy and prominent as the first colonist to successfully cultivate a profitable export strain of tobacco, arguably saving the entire colony's economic future. But Rolfe's place in American history rests on something else entirely, his marriage to Pocahontas, daughter of the Powhatan chief, in 1614. Their son, Thomas Rolfe, was born in January 1615. This history carries real weight and real complexity that should not be flattened into a simple romance. Pocahontas had been taken captive by the English in 1613 before the marriage took place, and the broader context of English-Powhatan relations in this period involved violence, displacement, and profound power imbalance. The marriage itself became and remains a deeply debated symbol in American historical memory. The surname Rolfe is an English personal name of Norse origin related to Rolf or Rudolph, meaning roughly famous wolf. What is verifiable genealogically, many Americans today can trace their family names directly back to the single union, including the surnames Bowling, Gay, Perkins, and Marinus, with descendant lines extending from Thomas Rolfe down through documented generations to the present day. Number 3. Randolph. Arriving mid-century, founding a Virginia dynasty. Henry Randolph arrived in Virginia in 1643, decades after the original Jamestown landing, but still early enough to become a foundational figure in what later genealogists would call the first families of Virginia, an elite social class of early colonial settlers. The surname Randolph is of Norman origin, a compound name combining Germanic elements meaning roughly shield wolf, brought to England after the Norman conquest of 1066 and carried by Henry Randolph across the Atlantic nearly 6 centuries later. These first families generally married within their own social class for generations, dans cette générations, consolidating both wealth and surname continuity simultaneously, which is precisely why names like Randolph remain traceable with such genealogical precision today, while less prominent colonial names often disappear into incomplete records. Number 2, Wormley, the captain who claimed land before there was a country. Captain Ralph Wormley came to Virginia in 1636, a documented member of the same elite colonial class that would later be formalized as the first families of Virginia. The surname Wormley, sometimes spelled Wormsley, is an English habitation name likely derived from a place name in England referring to a clearing or meadow, possibly associated with the presence of snakes or worms in the older sense of that word, which in Old English could refer to serpents or dragons rather than the small invertebrate we think of today. Documented from 1636 onward, the Wormley name illustrates a pattern common among Virginia's earliest elite: arrival mid-century, immediate access to land and authority, and a surname that survived precisely because it was attached from the very beginning to power and property. Number 1, Smith. The name that conquered an entire continent and arrived from everywhere at once. We end with a name that doesn't need a ship, a colony, or a single founding figure because it didn't arrive once. It arrived constantly from everywhere for 400 years straight. Smith is the oldest documented surname on this entire list in terms of pure written record. The surname dates back to at least the year 1100 in England, derived from the Old English word smid, meaning to strike or to smite, describing a metalworker, most commonly a blacksmith. Here's what makes Smith genuinely unique and why it earns the top spot. Unlike every other name on this list, Smith has no single point of origin, no one family, no one ship, no one colony. Because it was an occupational name describing one of the most essential trades in every single village across England, Scotland, and Wales, there were thousands of unrelated Smith families already established before a single one of them ever crossed the Atlantic. And then, something additional happened that is unique to America specifically. Immigrants from completely different countries, carrying their own native words for the same occupation, frequently anglicized their names to Smith upon arrival. German Schmidt families, Dutch Schmidt families, Scandinavian Smed families, all converging on the same English word. Smith was recorded as the most common surname in the United States in the 1790 census, representing roughly 33,000 people at the time. It held that position in 2000, 2010, and 2020, over 230 years of uninterrupted dominance, even as the U.S. population grew more than 80-fold and diversified beyond anything the colonial census takers could have imagined. No king, no ship's manifest, no single founding patriarch, just an essential medieval trade repeated independently across an entire continent in a dozen different languages until it became one single unstoppable name. That's not a surname that survived America. That's a surname that became America. 20 names, 400 years, and one pattern that connects almost every single one of them. Survival in early America had almost nothing to do with status and almost everything to do with timing, luck, and sheer demographic momentum. The researchers who traced these names made this point clearly. The surnames that endured weren't necessarily carried by the most influential or most numerous of the early settlers. They endured because of when they arrived, where they settled, and how the number simply compounded generation after generation, while other equally legitimate, equally historic names quietly disappeared. Out of 52 distinct surnames that stepped off the Mayflower in 1620, only 7 were still common enough nationally to register in the 1790 census. Out of roughly 100 men who landed at Jamestown in 1607, only 2 are confirmed to have living descendants today. That's the real lesson hidden inside American surnames. It's not a story of greatness, it's a story of ODDS and the handful of ordinary families who happen to beat them. So tell me in the comments, is your last name on this list? And if it's not, have you ever actually looked into where it came from? If you enjoyed this video, a like genuinely helps the channel grow. See you in the next one.